Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. If you see the new setting, and I welcome you to this new classroom, I would assume that you will recall that we had been discussing that the ambience or the environment also has a major impact on the learning process. So I hope that this new setting will be an addition to making you more attentive and more involved in our lectures. And if you also recall that what we were discussing in the last sessions, we had been talking about the credibility of the communication process, the whole process. Now, the credibility issue is critical because the sender or the source is trying to communicate a message to the consumer or what we call the target. The idea of this messaging is that whatever the source is trying to communicate to the consumer will be received by the consumer in exactly the same mode or feelings or emotions as the source was trying to communicate, which also involves a major point of credibility. Now, credibility basically means, as we have been discussing, how true would the message seem to the consumer, because the first point where the consumer gets into effect is whether he believes in the message or not. And we were discussing what major factors could be there which could have an impact on this credibility factor. And we were discussing, if you look at the model that we have where there is a source of communication, this source tries to generate a message. This message is basically encoded. The concept is in the mind of the source, and he tries to bring out this message in the shape of either words or maybe in terms of image or in terms of some design, and then he tries to pass it through a channel. Channel could be, like we have been discussing, the newspapers, the written material, the television, the websites, and this message reaches the consumer or the target. And target has to now, what you call, decode it. And during this process, throughout this whole system, there are points on which credibility can be affected. We have already discussed the credibility of the source in terms of if a source has no believability, then the message will be affected. It is in the same context that we look at the message itself. If the message is too incongruous, which means very difficult to believe, people will not believe the message. In the same form, if the media through which the message is being sent will have an impact on credibility, and I recall we had discussed the example of the Fortune magazine, and we suggested that even the Fortune magazine itself gives or lends credibility to the message content. Why? Because people believe that that magazine or magazine of the similar nature have very high credibility, and they will not publish anything which is not truth or not truthful. So given that framework, even that choice of the medium will have an impact on the credibility of the message. Now we will be discussing the impact of the target itself on credibility of the message or how the message is received. Now, please remember that when we talk about credibility, we are not just talking about the truth that is perceived in the message, whether the message is true or not. The problem also is when the target is going to decode the message. And if the target does not decode the message in exactly the same form as the source desired, then we will say that there is a problem of credibility, because whatever the source said has been misinterpreted by the target. And because the target has misinterpreted, he will obviously not have faith in the message itself because of that complication. Now, what are the personal characteristics of the consumer or the target which may have an impact on the credibility? One of the major problems that we face is the target or the consumer's prior knowledge, prior behavior, prior experience. We have discussed that quite a bit. when we were talking about learning and how attitudes are formed. And I'll just give you an example. See, if you see a professor who is very serious by his looks, he seems to be very serious, people tend to assume that he will also be very strict in marking because his appearance suggests that he is a strict man. But that may not be true. Now, obviously, there will be a confusion. Now, even if the professor has marked the paper accurately and exactly as the paper deserves, people will still tend to suggest that the marking was strict and it was injustice done to them. Therefore, there will be a problem of credibility in the marking of the professor. So these are a few factors which has a problem in decoding the system. Now, that is not all. The problem also is that the target's credibility is affected because of the person's own ability to interpret the message. Is there a message which is coming through, a person is, and there is a lot of detail in it. The detail may be very accurate, but because the consumer or the target is not well versed in those terminologies and so on and so forth, he may lose the concept of accuracy in it. And because of that, it can have a major impact on the credibility of the message that was being passed on. The third area, which is very important, is how strongly is the person involved in the product himself or herself. If the product involvement is very high, and if the person is very closely involved in assessing the product message, then obviously this person will need more details in the message so that he can do the comparison. Having discussed all this regarding the target, we are now coming into the impact of moods of the consumer or the target on the credibility of the message. And remember, I'm again repeating, credibility just does not only mean whether the message is true or not. The credibility also suggests whether the message has been accurately decoded. And if there is a gap, we will still call it credibility issue, that the message has been mistaken. Now, mood, we have already been suggesting that, like the ambience, as I mentioned when the start of the class, as well as the mood of the target audience has an impact on the credibility of the message. It has been suggested that positive mood, if there is, तो लोग retain करते हैं brand names को. Now, obviously, one of the objective of the source is also to make sure that they have been able to create awareness of the brand or the product in the mind of the consumer. Now, exactly in the same format, like we're talking about the credibility, that if a person has got a positive mood, he's in a happy mood, then according to research which has been undertaken quite extensively, it suggests that people will tend to retain more brand names. And like I said, if the person's mood is not good, he receives the message and he does not remember the brand names, there is a credibility gap in the message given or the objective of the message and the reception and the outcome of the message. So we are into a problem area because of the moods also. Further, we also have to look at that it is not only the mood that influences the credibility of the message, but sometimes even the message content and the context of the message also creates moods in the people. And we have already discussed that where we have perfume, cosmetics, things which are related to personal physical beauty or physical characteristics, then emotional messages are more suitable. Why? Because it has been suggested that people are emotionally linked where their own physical appearances are concerned. However, if the product is more like technical, then obviously rather than emotional, you need to have more detailed information that is provided in the message so that the customer has enough technical knowledge to be able to distinguish between these things. Now, we are going to move, having discussed these credibility issues, to the barriers of communication, because we have not concluded the whole process, and the barriers of communication are very important. Though some of the parts we have already discussed earlier when we were talking about the communication itself and the issues when the message goes through and what happens and the a lot of noise that is created. We are now going to talk about it in a little bit more specific fashion. Let's take an example. Let's say that somebody is thinking in this class, is thinking of the party that he has or she has to attend in the evening. Now, sometimes it happens that the faculty or the professor who's standing in front is talking to the person or the class, and then he asks a question. And he points out to the person who has been actually thinking about the party, and you will recall and you will remember that most of the time, the student doesn't even know what the question was, what was happening now. Think about what was happening. There was a barrier being created between the professor and the target, that is the student. And this barrier was being created not because of anything, but because of distraction. This distraction can come from any source. Like in this case, the distraction came from the person's own involvement in some other factor. So he was thinking of totally a different framework, and therefore he had lost the link between the professor's discourse और प्रोफेसर जो पढ़ा रहे थे उसके और स्टूडेंट के बीच में गैप जो है वो स्टूडेंट के अपनी वजह से पैदा हुआ. Now, it could be because of that. It could also happen like if there was some kind of a construction work taking place next door, a lot of noise is being made, and all this noise, the student might not even be able to listen to the lecture. So again, a gap is being created because a lot of noise has been created. Therefore, what we call this, the example that I just gave you relates to what we have selective exposure to a message. And if you recall, what has happened is that the person or the student has decided to exclude the professor's lecture and get attention or start paying attention to a party that he would be or she would be attending in the evening, which is basically he has made a selection or a choice. Now, we will discuss this, and then we will come to another example, which is more or less called the psychological noise. And this psychological noise is within the system, and that is more like a radio. If you've heard radios, and you can sometimes see that, particularly if you are driving the car and you are listening to the radio, FM radios, and then you pass very close to the high overhead cables, and suddenly there is some kind of static in the radio and you cannot really listen to the music now or the message that is coming through. These two methods or two approaches to selective exposure to the message as well as psychological noise, we will discuss them, and then we will see what strategies there are to overcome these. Let's go to the selective exposure. Now, the problem which, because of technological advances, is that at a point of time when there was no remote controls and people had to sit and watch through a program, and if they wanted to change the program, they had to go to the television set to change the channel. Now, with the help of the remote controls, what people tend to do is that they start grazing or start wandering between the channels, particularly during the commercial. And if you recall, people have already started to understand that the commercial will be for 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 1 minute. And during this period, they quickly check 4 or 5 other channels to be able to avoid this communication. And that basically is what they are doing is they are selectively excluding the media message. Therefore, again, there will be a problem or a barrier communicated. Now, at that point of time, what they normally tend to do is that we see that if you watch the television closely, the program is coming at a certain noise level, and then suddenly the program is stopped and an ad starts and the noise level goes up. So most people, what they do is they immediately press the mute और उसकी आवाज बंद कर देते हैं. Now again, another barrier has occurred during this period. Further happening now is that channels surfing, like I've told you, what people are doing with latest technology is that people can record the whole program. Even while they are watching some other program, they can get third program being recorded by a recording system or the VCRs or frameworks that we are now producing. And when they are going through the program itself, they can quickly zip through or get through the communication part of it or the message part of it. So what is the strategy to counter this with the source or the media people, what they tend to do is that they would send this advertisement to a number of channels at the same time. So, and you would observe that while you are watching the television, if at a point of time, particularly during the commercial break, if you go to another channel, most probably you will see the same kind of ad going there also. And the reason is what they are trying to do is what we call road blocking. So road blocking particularly means that the person is going to, or the media is trying to stop the person from getting away from the context of the communication or the message itself. Now, then we have more further things that we normally have is in the direct communication channel where we use telemarketing. People now can see the ID, the telephone or the mobile ID, and they can refuse to accept these messages. So in place of that, what people have started doing is that they send a particular SMS message for the purposes of reaching a particular customized target. This was particularly related to the strategy or the barrier that is created because of selected exposure. Now we move towards the psychological noise, which is basically a problem which is internalized and the system static occurs because of their own frameworks. So what are the strategies that the message source or the sender of the message has? We've already discussed one, that is road blocking. The other basically is what we do is that we repeat the message again and again. And the reason for that, we've already discussed earlier, is that if ever a person misses this message in one time frame, he will be able to see the same message in another time frame. So the message has actually gotten through. Then I've talked about when you go for the telemarketing or when you have a message being sent on the telephone, then rather than having a communication, people are now customizing messages to individuals and sending them on the cell phones. So SMS की shape में आपको marketing message भी मिल जाते हैं. Now, these are few strategies that we have. Having completed the target area and the barriers to the whole process of communication, we come to the one of the most crucial link in the process, and that is the feedback loop. If you recall the model that we had shown, there was the importance of the feedback from where we come from the target and the decoding of the message, and we talked about it being changed or adjusted by the source based on the information that is passed from the target to the source itself. Now, one of the most important factors which will help us determine the efficiency of the message, not only from the point of view of the source, but the use of the media and whatever, is to be able to state the goals of the communication very categorically. Now, we should understand that goals could be, for example, creating awareness of the product, improving the recall of the brands. Why? Because when a person tries to purchase a product category, in a product category, he normally has a set of brand names that he can recall immediately. The idea behind this set of brands in his mind is that he will obviously choose from among them. And the marketers, one of the goals of the marketer is that his brand should become part of the choice set. Because agar wo brand uske choice set mein jayega hi nahi consumer ke, it will never come under consideration for purchase purposes. So one of the major tasks of communication is to make the person aware of the brand. A subsequent factor also is to increase the sales. Now, research suggests that the objective of creating awareness is more easily measurable and more easily understandable than the target of increasing sales, because there are so many other factors which could influence the sales itself. So we need to be very clear as to what are the communication goals. Only because of these goals, if we have set them, can we actually measure whether we have been able to achieve the goal or not. Now, we've already suggested that in this feedback loop, the best possible frame is where you have interpersonal communication. Like I mentioned to you, two of the factors that normally are the goals of the communicator. One is to create awareness, and improve the brand recall. Second, to increase sales. Therefore, in interpersonal communication, where a salesman is talking directly to the consumer, these two can be measured immediately. The basic reasoning is that we can see that he can immediately interact and respond or change his strategy to communicate. A good example would be, let's say in the class, if the professor sees that the class is becoming a little disinterested and the class is becoming a little disengaged, so what does he do? What he does is he normally would say, okay, please consider that this material that we are discussing would definitely be coming in the exam. The minute this message is given, the people become attentive to the system again. And why is this happening? Because there is a direct interpersonal connection between the professor and the class, which may not happen when we have impersonal communication. So we've already suggested that the best form of having an interpersonal communication and achieving the goals can be done through this direct contact, but we also know that most of the messages are through mass communication systems. Obviously, since it's mass communication, since a lot of money is expended on these messages, cost of advertising is very high. So logic कहता है कि जो feedback system है, that should be more systematically formed into a system of this process. Logic क्या है कि दो तरीके हैं आप अपनी cost को control कर सके, and like I was saying to you that these costs have an impact on the overall what do you call the living standard of the people. कैसे हो सकता है? मिसाल के तौर पे आप लाखों रुपया खर्च करते हैं एक एड पे और उसका कोई इम्पैक्ट नहीं हो रहा, नॉर इन क्रिएटिंग अवेयरनेस, और अगर वो अवेयरनेस क्रिएट भी हो रही है तो उसका इम्पैक्ट किसी एटीट्यूड पे नहीं हो रहा, ना पॉजिटिव एटीट्यूड क्रिएट हो रहा है जिसकी वजह से सेल्स पे भी असर नहीं आ रहा. तो हो क्या रहा है कि ये लाखों रुपया इज बीइंग वेस्टेड, बट इट इज नॉट ओनली बीइंग वेस्टेड बाय द कंपनी, इसकी जो कॉस्ट है वो उस प्रोडक्ट की प्राइस में ऐड हो जाएगी. सो द प्रोडक्ट प्राइस विल गो अप फॉर नो राइम और रीजन, बिकॉज अगर वो ऐड ना भी दें तो भी चीज बिक सकती है, और रादर इट मे हैव अ पॉजिटिव काइंड ऑफ एन इम्पैक्ट ऑन द सेल्स बिकॉज उसकी प्राइस कम होगी, तो मे बी इट इज मोर परचेजेबल, एंड देयर इज ऑलवेज अ लिंक बिटवीन द प्राइस एंड द डिमांड ऑफ द प्रोडक्ट एज वी नो फ्रॉम इकोनॉमिक्स. सो लॉजिक कहता है कि जब भी आप किसी भी जगह के ऊपर अगर आप कॉस्ट बढ़ा देते हैं किसी भी पॉइंट से, तो वो कोई मकसद सॉल्व नहीं करता. देयरफॉर particularly in this area of marketing, we need to have a method to check the feedback possibilities of the message that is going to go to the market. So there are two methods. एक है कि मैसेज देने से पहले आप उसको टेस्ट कर लें, which we call pre-test or a priori evaluation of the message. और there was a good example. There is a company called Burke Marketing, और अमेरिका में एक कंपनी ने एक एड तैयार किया और उस पर कोई तकरीबन 7-8 लाख का खर्चा उसके ऐड बनाने पे आया. एंड देन उन्होंने एस्टिमेट ये किया कि जब ये रन करेंगे हम 3 महीने के लिए या जिस पीरियड के लिए भी उन्होंने डिटर्मिन किया था, तो होगा क्या कि दे विल ऐड अनदर 40 million, approximately $40 million to the cost. So somebody who was intelligent in the system says कि 40 million यानी कि $4 करोड़ खर्च करने से पहले let's have this ad evaluated. So the company was called in, Burke Marketing was called in, and Burke Marketing carried out a test and evaluation on the impact of this ad on the consumers. तो वो consumers भी चूंकि targeted थे, उनके segment थे, तो उनके जो segment choice के ऊपर जिसको उन्होंने ad भेजना था, so they went and did some research on it. This primary kind of research got back the message कि इसका कोई impact नहीं होने वाला. Now, this helped save the company close to $40 million. अगर वो ना करते, ad जाता, असर ना होता, ये सारे का सारा waste होता, और price के ऊपर इसका impact आना था, so logically. So they had to actually change part of those ads to make it more influential. Now, ये तो है before the thing has taken place. But it still is because let's say we had already suggested कि barriers होते हैं, credibility issues हैं, decoding का problem है, and so forth. So what do we need to do is to check again once the ad has gone through, maybe immediately after, or maybe after a point of time, check takes place. और उसमें again दोनों किस्म के issues होते हैं. अवेयरनेस क्रिएट करने का अगर ऑब्जेक्टिव है तो अवेयरनेस चेक की जाती है, और अगर सेल्स देखने का है तो सेल्स के ऊपर जो इम्पैक्ट किसी पीरियड के बाद उन्होंने एस्टिमेट किया तो वो इट इज टेकन इनटू कंसिडरेशन. नाउ एक बड़ी सिंपल सी एग्जांपल इस चीज की ऐसे है कि समटाइम्स रिटेल आउटलेट्स, मे बी डिपार्टमेंटल स्टोर्स, दे अनाउंस देयर सेल्स, डिस्काउंटेड सेल्स. कभी होता है सर्दियों के बाद जब गर्म मौसम आने वाला हो तो a number of departmental stores take out their old stock and they put it on sale on discounts. तो अगर ऐसा एड अखबार में आए जिसमें डिस्काउंट की बेसिस के ऊपर सेल्स की अनाउंसमेंट हुई है, तो दूसरे दिन ही अकॉर्डिंग टू रिसर्च बिफोर द इवनिंग कम्स वी कैन एस्टिमेट कि इस एड का कोई इम्पैक्ट हुआ कि नहीं हुआ. However, as I've already suggested to you categorically, that it is very difficult to measure the impact of sales on sales because of the ad. This discussion that we have been having about the feedback system, we have now actually defined the methods that we have of how to evaluate the effectiveness of the ad. और इसी को हम जब भी करेंगे, what we will be trying to suggest is how do we measure not only the effectiveness, but we also need to measure the exposure of the advertisement that we have. So एक और research की ज़रूरत है in terms of the feedback system, because एक target ये भी होता है कि how many people were able to watch the ad and how many people were able to remember the ad. That is the basic issue when we talk about the simple concept of awareness. Now, इसमें दो चीजें हैं which are very important, and that is how many saw that and who actually saw it. How many people were exposed to the ad, and then who were the people the same that were targeted, or it was some other people who had watched this ad. Now, इस हवाले से strategies हैं, because अगर यहाँ भी गलती होती है, what we normally get into is that we might be sending a message through a medium to a totally different target which was not in our strategy. तो इसके लिए what we have is basically services available हैं जिसमें audience की profiles हमें मिल जाती हैं. Syndicated services कहलाती हैं इनको, कि जो भी कंपनी किसी भी टारगेट मार्केट को जब एड देना चाहें तो they can actually read the characteristics, the demographics, so and so forth of the target market. और उसके बेसिस के ऊपर they can even find out कि ये जो demographics वाले लोग हैं जिसमें उनकी जो सेगमेंट्स हैं वो उनकी परचेजिंग पावर पे बेस करती है, और वो किस किस्म के मैगजीन्स पढ़ते हैं, what kind of retail outlets they visit, and so forth. So this information, there are certain companies which do this research and they are known as syndicated services, which is, I mean, in Pakistan, for example, we have what we call AC Nielsen. Now, AC Nielsen also collects all this demographics, information regarding viewerships, regarding what ads are watched, what TV shows are watched, what programs are more popular. और फिर ये जो information है ये बेची जाती है to companies so that they can make their decision and choices. Now, इसमें एक जो latest technology which has moved into Pakistan is also what we might call people's meter. ये एक नया system है. What happens is that companies like Nielsen and so forth, they actually take a number of households. I think what, to my knowledge, at this point of time in Pakistan, there are about 5,000 households जो इस people's meter के system में involved हैं. और उसमें होता क्या है, there is a small box. This box is attached to the computer और उसमें buttons हैं. There are a number of buttons on the box itself. और हर बटन का हाउस होल्ड में जितने भी मेंबर्स हैं उनका एक ना एक बटन होगा. So whatever happens, and this is the agreement, that whenever a household member, whoever it is, sits down to watch the television, he presses the button which is allocated to him. And immediately that he goes through the process of surfing, watching a particular program during prime time, through sports, wherever he goes, this information is going to the Nielsen's center, where all this information is collected, and from there, statistically they extrapolate के इन 5,000 जो लोग हैं उसमें मुख्तलिफ डेमोग्राफिक्स के लोग हैं, और फिर कौन क्या देख रहा है और उनकी व्यूअरशिप कैसी है. This is all what is now being used very extensively. Further, there is also something we call diaries. Again, these syndicated services, they get people involved in them, और वो उनसे हर घंटा, हर आधे घंटे के हवाले से डायरी मेंटेन करवा लेते हैं, so that they can even find कि अगर उसमें कोई ad उनको पसंद आया या नहीं आया, even that is mentioned. All this is part and parcel of how much effect has the message given to the person, उसकी reception कैसे हुई, उसकी awareness और उसके जो क्या नाम है, उसकी जो attention है वो कितनी उसने capture की. All this becomes part of this kind of research. Up till now we were discussing how much attention has been or how much exposure has taken place regarding the message. Now there is other technologies which are being used, and these are normally used in the pre-testing stage. मकसद जैसे मैंने आपसे कहा था कि whenever we are going to go into advertisement and we are going to spend money, तो यही नहीं है कि हम देखेंगे ये किन किन को पहुंचा, किन्होंने रिसीव किया, how many people saw it, what did they क्या नाम है, discern from it, what did they find from it. We also want to check beforehand कि इसका impact होना क्या है, which I gave you an example, like the Burke marketing company normally did that for a company, for a firm which wanted to advertise. यहाँ अब science has gone so high कि attention जो है message की, even that is measured. मकसद ये है because one of the major components of the process is to capture the attention of the consumer or the target. अब capture करने के लिए कि एक ad में how much content or how much ability does this message has to attract the attention of the consumer, तो उसके लिए कुछ latest technologies which are being used. For example, आई के जो movement है, मिसाल के तौर पे जब आप किसी उसमें जाते हैं रिटेल आउटलेट में और डिपार्टमेंटल स्टोर में जाते हैं, हमने जो आपको एक बड़ा डिपार्टमेंटल स्टोर दिखाया था, सुपर स्टोर, उसमें products are lined all over the shelves and everywhere the products are located. So the cameras normally watch and look at the eyes of the consumer who's moving through the aisles. Aisles are basically the gap between the two shelf space. और वो नोट करते हैं कि आपकी आंखें कहाँ जाके ठहरती हैं. Why? Because those points become important for placement of the products on the shelves. Research कहती है, और the research which has been conducted in Pakistan also, कि एक खास लेवल पे जो आंख होती है तो वहाँ अटेंशन मैक्सिमाइज हो जाती है. इसीलिए टॉयज आर अस एक कंपनी है जो बच्चों के लिए टॉयज बनाती है, वो भी रिसर्च करते हैं कि उनके प्रोडक्ट्स जो हैं, क्योंकि उनके जो प्रोडक्ट्स हैं दे रेंज फ्रॉम टॉयज फ्रॉम 1 year old to children, let's say 14, 15. So what they look at is कि अगर एक 3 साल का बच्चा है तो वो जब शेल्फ को देखेगा तो उसकी हाइट से उनको जो चीजें नजर आती हैं वो कैसे नजर आती हैं. Now again, all this is done through highly recommended technologies. Not only that, this is one framework. The second is when we see the facial expressions or the movement of the muscles of the face when we watch an ad or we watch a movie or we watch something which catches our attention. तो उसमें क्या होता है कि the cameras, just like हमारा है कार्डियोग्राम चेक किया जाता है हार्ट का, तो उसको चेक करने के लिए what we have basically what we call facial ECG. वो उनका मकसद ये है कि जिस वक्त आप स्माइल करने लगते हैं या आपकी आंखें थोड़ी क्लोज होती हैं या you become angry or you become disinterested, तो facial expression change करते हैं. That gives us a good information as to what kind of attention has been able to be captured by the message. Finally, जो research की जा रही है in this area of holding attention and so forth is recall. We have already discussed it a little before also, but now this is the most suitable place to discuss it a little further. उसमें recall and recognition ये दो aspects हैं for any message to suggest how much attention did they draw from the target market. तो recall है और उसके साथ we have what we call recognition. Normally, companies tend to do is that they want to immediately after the day the ad has been launched, particularly with the people whom they are on this, like I told you about the Nielsen system, or there are other syndicated systems जिसके अंदर immediately call की जाती है या there is a very clear क्या नाम है papers or survey done to see कि जिन्होंने वो message देखा था उसमें can they recall the ad that was given. और रादर दे पूछते ये हैं कि आपने कौन कौन से एड जो हैं वो आपने देखे या आपको जिनका अटेंशन रहा. इफ द पर्सन रिमेंबर्स द एड्स दैट ही सॉ और उसमें अगर आपका एड नहीं है तो इट सजेस्ट दैट इट लैक्ड अटेंशन कैरिंग थिंग्स, इट लैक्ड थिंग्स व्हिच वुड हेल्प इट टू बी रिकॉल्ड. सिमिलरली देयर इज समथिंग वी कॉल द रिकग्निशन प्रोसेस. अब रिकग्निशन में थोड़ा सपोर्ट चाहिए होती है और वो ये कि मैगजीन दिखाया जाता है या टीवी का वो प्रोग्राम दिखाया जाता है और उसमें कहा जाता है कि इसमें आपने कोई ऐड देखा था इस प्रोग्राम के हवाले से. तो इफ़ यू हैव अ नेम फॉर द प्रोग्राम दैट कैन बी आस्क्ड, और उसमें अगर वो शख्स उसको प्रोग्राम के हवाले से रिकग्नाइज कर लेता है तो दैट मीन्स ही कैन रिकग्नाइज द ऐड वंस इट वाज हेल्प, ही वाज गिवन हेल्प टू डू इट. And recall में जैसे मैंने कहा it is purely unaided, which means that what you have done is you just ask the person के कल आपने जो कुछ भी देखा उसमें कोई ads आपको याद आते हैं तो if you can write those down. और फिर उसमें ये भी पूछ लिया जाता है कि what was the most significant point that is in your mind, जिसके हवाले से आपको वो ad याद रहा. This helps the people to target on to the points in which attention can be held और ऐसी जगहें जहां improvement की जा सकती है. Now, all this basically related to the feedback system and how do we measure the impact of our advertisement. अब finally इस last point पे हमारे पास जो information रह जाती है वो है कि हमारे पास communication strategies हैं क्या. Communication strategies 4 जगहों पे हम उसको डिस्कस करेंगे. Number 1 is the objectives of the communication, because like we said from the very beginning, कि strategy बनती उस वक्त है जब हमारे पास clear cut objectives हों. अगर objectives नहीं होंगे we will not be able to create a particular strategy. और इसके लिए बड़ी simple सा एक example है कि if you want to create awareness of a particular product, तो उसके लिए जो भी ad होगा उसका मकसद सिर्फ ये होगा कि वो encourage करे आपकी रिकॉल को, यानी कि रिकग्निशन आ जाए. लेकिन अगर आपका मैसेज चाहता है कि वो सेल इंक्रीज करे तो फिर वो मैसेज या डिस्काउंट ऑफर कर रहा होगा या सेल्स में कूपन्स ऑफर कर रहा होगा. वट एवर इज द मैसेज रिलेटिंग टू दैट, टू वी कैन सी द एग्जैक्ट इम्पैक्ट ऑफ दैट कंटेंट ऑफ द मैसेज ऑन द कंज्यूमर्स माइंड. नाउ बिफोर वी गो इनटू द फाइनल स्टेज ऑफ डेवलपिंग द स्ट्रैटेजीज, we might like to revisit our model that we started with, which was very simple. अब ये जो मॉडल मैं आपको दिखा रहा हूँ इसमें it is a little bit more elaborate और इसमें वो सारे points हम शामिल कर देंगे, the ones that we have been discussing through the models framework. Now this model, if you look at the screen, you will find that there is what we call the sender, and we have the basic ingredients of the senders area is the commercial and the non-commercial. Then this message has to be created, and message create होने से पहले उसको encode किया जाएगा. So there are different frameworks of encoding which includes like picture, symbols, words. Message जो है वो again it has to have a few characteristics कि वो verbal हो सकता है या non-verbal हो सकता है. And this is where I'm going to be talking about the message strategy, which we will do at the later stage. But you recall and watch that in this model we have going to be discussing two aspects. One is one-sided or versus the two-sided, and a fact versus emotion. So again, the message itself would be looked at when we will talk about it in the next session, when we are just going to look at the message strategy. Then we come into the media or the channel, and we have now again, it is either paid or non-paid, and we have discussed the aspect of non-paid, which is basically publicity, and the import or the importance of publicity versus paid advertisements. Then we have different kind of media, electronic media, we have broadcasting, we have print media. And then we discussed what we have between the channel and the receiver is the selective exposure framework, which is the barrier that is created in the system. And once the receiver receives it, we again went into the process of how does he decode it. And we suggested that there could be a number of problems while the decoding of the message takes place. However, we already suggested certain strategies that those strategies might help to overcome this issue. उसके बाद अगर आप गौर से देखें तो फिर आ जाता है क्वेश्चन कि डिकोड हुआ तो क्या जो एक्शन आप मांगते थे, the action that was desired by the sender or the source, has it been completed? For example, अगर वो complete हो गया तो then there is no problem, the feedback loop suggests that everything is okay. लेकिन अगर उसके अंदर जो आपने जो भी कुछ जो ऑब्जेक्टिव था वो पूरा अगर नहीं होता उस मैसेज का, तो उसके दो ही वजूहात हो सकते हैं. वन, कि जो मैसेज है वो एक्चुअली समझा ठीक नहीं गया, या पहुंचा नहीं, या समझा नहीं गया. Now again, the problem is to the feedback system would suggest, then what do we do about it? Either we correct the message itself so that we can get into the right kind of a message or go through the right medium or whatever. And then agar wo pahuncha hi nahi, so again the problem is whether the medium was not selected correctly or the target market was not selected correctly. And it is here using this model that we should be able to develop our strategies. And like I was talking to you about that, but before anything happens, particularly if we look at कि sender जब अपनी strategy बनाने लगता है तो he has to first establish कि उसके objective क्या हैं. And I have also suggested that objectives के अंदर सबसे important और जो कि logical है वो है कि awareness कितनी create हुई और कितनी recall उस product के हवाले से या उस brand के हवाले से create हो चुकी है in the consumer market. And all these frameworks are linked one by one to the things that we have been discussing up till now, or this particular aspect of the objective, particularly in the case of awareness creation, is critical to the system. और हमने कहा कि we have to also check how it can be improved or how it can be measured. अब उसका दूसरा जो strategy आती है वो आती है the target market. अब target market को select करने के लिए what are the issues that we find? We have already discussed that there are certain syndicated services which actually are providing us profiles of our target market, or not only the profiles, but also they help us determine कि ये जो target market है उसमें जो segments हैं उनके demographics क्या हैं. Not only the demographics, and the reason why demographics are important, we have discussed it, कि अगर youth है, teenage group है, तो फिर उसको जो उनका मॉडल या उनका जो आइडल है या उनकी जो सेलिब्रिटी है वो वही सिलेक्ट होगी जो इस टारगेट मार्केट को अफेक्ट करती है. और ये रिलेशनशिप कैन ओनली बी डिटरमिन्ड वंस वी आर अवेयर ऑफ द डेमोग्राफिक्स ऑफ द टारगेट मार्केट. इसी तरह से देयर आर अदर फैक्टर्स दैट वी वांट टू लुक एट व्हेन वी ब्रिंग इनटू द सिलेक्शन ऑफ द टारगेट. आवर मैसेज इज गोइंग टू बी टेलर्ड टुवर्ड द टारगेट. अब उसके हवाले से now we have to then decide the media strategy. We've already suggested in the model that media can be anything from non-verbal to verbal, to the fact of being on the web, to be on the cell phones. Wherever you have, the media can be determined with the help of the objective set and the kind of target that you have. We are very clear, as we had discussed earlier, that if we know that our target market is more influenced or more attuned to visiting or browsing on the web, तो लॉजिक कहता है कि हमारी जो टारगेट मार्केट है वो इसी चीज़ को फोकस करे और इस्तेमाल करे वेब sites को and develop our own websites, and that is why you will find more proliferation in that particular area. But it is not sufficient to only locate the media in terms of the target, but within the media, there will be a number of types of magazines. We have in the area of the business, we have the business back, we have the fortune, we have so many other areas, but there are very clear lines as to which particular media is read by which particular target market. And based on this, we can then develop our strategy of the message. What kind of message should we be able to develop and create? I think we will not be able to complete the whole of the message strategies, but I will take a brief out of the message strategies that I just suggested to you that we can, if we are very clear about our target market and the way we approach this through the media. One of these strategies, which is message strategies, are related to the framing of the message. और इसमें एक strategy जो हमारे पास है वो है positive और negative framing. It's very simple to understand this strategy. और इसके ऊपर भी research हुई है whether it should be positively oriented or negatively oriented. और उसमें जो positive और उसका negative frame है वो ऐसे create होता है कि positive frame के अंदर we only talk about the benefits that the person will get. In the sense कि अगर आप वो चीज़ खरीदें तो उसके benefits क्या होंगे. और नेगेटिव फ्रेमिंग के अंदर क्या होता है कि वी टॉक अबाउट व्हाट विल नॉट बी अवेलेबल टू द पर्सन इफ ही डज नॉट बाय. आपने कई एड्स देखे होंगे जिसमें कई जगहों के ऊपर अगर आपने वो चीज़ नहीं ली या उस चीज़ को इस्तेमाल नहीं किया तो उसको ना इस्तेमाल करने की वजह से जो उसके नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट्स हैं उनको ज़्यादा एम्फसाइज किया जाता है. दिस इज़ पार्ट ऑफ द नेगेटिव फ्रेमिंग ऑफ द मैसेज. ऑन द अदर साइड पॉजिटिव के अंदर वो क्वालिटीज या वो चीजें दिखाई जाती हैं जिसके अंदर इस्तेमाल करने से जो बेनिफिट्स आते हैं. नाउ आई हैव जस्ट इनिशिएटेड दिस पर्टिकुलर एरिया ऑफ this discussion on the message strategies. There are a number of strategies, so we will take them on in the next class. But at this point of time, I would like to recapitulate whatever we have been discussing, particularly related to the areas that we thought about in terms of the barriers to communication. और ये याद रखिएगा कि ये जो barriers to communication है ये काफ़ी critical होते हैं in the message frame और process के अंदर. Why? Because whenever we are going to go through the messaging system, we just cannot assume that जो हमने message दिया वो मनोवन exactly in the same frames पहुंच गया होगा और उसको जो कंज्यूमर्स हैं या जो टारगेट मार्केट है उन्होंने समझ भी लिया होगा. तो ये जो बैरियर्स हैं इनको ओवरकम करना या इनको कोशिश करना कि ये रिड्यूस हो जाएं या इनके प्रॉब्लम्स रिड्यूस हो जाएं, दिस बिकम्स अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फ्रेमवर्क, पर्टिकुलरली व्हेन वी हैव बीन डिस्कसिंग द फीडबैक लूप्स. और इन बैरियर्स को एक तो कम करने की कोशिश करना ज़रूरी है, लेकिन फिर फीडबैक में पता लगाना कि वाकई ये हुआ या ये बैरियर इफेक्ट कर रहा है या ये जो मैसेज हम दे रहे थे वाज इट करेक्टली इवैल्यूएटेड, करेक्टली इंटरप्रेटेड, करेक्टली अंडरस्टूड. उसके लिए हमने आपको अ नंबर ऑफ एरियाज हैव बीन एक्सप्लेन एंड दोज एरियाज इंक्लूड के इफेक्टिवनेस क्या है, अवेयरनेस और अटेंशन कितनी क्रिएट की, अवेयरनेस कितनी क्रिएट की. और इस हवाले से वी हैव डिस्कस्ड सर्टेन ब्रॉड research frameworks in which we can go and find out who actually saw the message, how many saw the message. और उसके हवाले से अगर आप याद करें तो we talked about the people's meter where research has been done and there are instruments which can actually check कि किन्होंने और कितनों ने ये जो आपकी communication थी या ad था was observed by them. In the same way, newspapers also carry out similar kind of studies जैसे मैंने आपको एक्सप्लेन की हैं जो कि पीपल्स मीटर करते हैं पर्टिकुलरली रिलेटेड टू टेलीविजन एडवर्टाइजमेंट. उनका या न्यूज़पेपर या जो प्रिंट मीडिया है उनके अंदर भी पीपल टेंड टू स्टडी द रीडरशिप ऑफ द मीडिया, पर्टिकुलरली द न्यूज़ प्रिंट, न्यूज़पेपर्स, मैगजीन्स एंड सो फोर्थ. और उनकी जो सब्सक्रिप्शन होती है और फिर जो फ्री वो अवेलेबल होते हैं इन डिफरेंट ऑफिसेज, इस सारे इंफॉर्मेशन को जमा करके वी कैन वेरी इजीली अंडरस्टैंड how many people would be able to see an ad based on the readership, as well as because of the profile of the people who subscribe to these magazines, we can also study कि वो कौन हैं जिन्होंने इस ad को देखा होगा. With the help of these 2 or 3 frameworks, we can make a very good strategic what do you call decision as to किस किस्म के मीडिया में या किस किस्म की टारगेट को हम अपना मैसेज जो है वो पहुंचाएंगे. With this, we come to the conclusion of the lecture, and we believe and I hope that in the next one we will continue with the what do you call the next part of it, which is going to be the message strategies, जिसके अंदर हमने जो cover करने वाली areas हैं वो हैं resonance, one-sided or two-sided arguments which are normally created in the message. And this brings us to the end of our current lecture. In the next session, once we have finished these message strategies that we are discussing now, which will take a very short time, we will then move into the major discussion on influences on the consumer behavior, particularly from the reference groups or the family. Okay, with this, we end the lecture. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.